Hello, this is Dr. G here, tackling student questions for COM 2143, digital media literacy, and we're going to do a deep dive right back into questions. We're going to look at a pair from Savannah, and the second question is going to be a direct link back to our previous discussion from Luan's question. It had to do with Jean Baudrillard, so hang tight for that. In the meantime, we have the first question draws upon our Marcel Danesi text, Popular Culture, Introductory Perspectives. And in that book, Savannah writes, page 40 gives an example of how a James Bond film demonstrated the want for control of others through mass media. Do you think we have hit that point in our society? I give it a little bit of quick thought. I believe the title of that James Bond feature is Tomorrow Never Dies, if I'm not mistaken. This is the second in Pierce Brosnan's four turns as Bond, primarily films that came out in the 90s into the early 2000s. But the villain of that second feature is a mass media mogul, right? And his super villain machinations have to do with manipulating the world geopolitical status, right? New kind of post Cold War tensions through essentially the creation of fake news, right? He stages actual war, and thus Bond must kind of intercept and thwart those plans. And it seems a little bit corny and campy, and maybe it did then, and perhaps parts of the movie would be to us today. But my, if this metaphorical super villain does not resonate with some of the mass media moguls that we have in power, in places of power today, right? And this is not, Bond film wasn't innovating anything by any means. Media has always had a talent for reflecting on itself, turning an eye on its own happenings and practices. One of the great films of all time, a longtime AFI top film for all time, Citizen Kane, is about the effects of great power and the rise to dominance using mass media to influence the populace, even at a cost. And so examples like that, we cannot help but see the connectivity. But the question is, do you think we've hit that point in our society? And this would be a great discussion question. This would be a great question to ask students, even to research. I'd be fascinated to see what you all would come up with. I have a couple of ideas that definitely come to mind. We can definitely see that people in positions of power utilize media to their advantage, or seek to acquire mass media to aid their narratives, right? Whatever that narrative represents. It could represent a certain agenda that they have, either individually or politically, right? So I think examples like that do exist, and we could definitely identify some. And I believe that character was loosely inspired by a native Australian by the name of Rupert Murdoch, who was accumulating a lot of not only mass media influence in his native homeland, but went on to do so in the UK, and kind of bought up not only some of the prestigious news outlets, but also some of the gossip rags, right? Those the magazines and newspapers and things that really spoke to common person interests, and he gained a swell of influence as a result. And what did he do with that? The sort of the wealth of information, the wealth of audience reach? Well, he continued to build. And by the mid 90s, which this film was right on the heels of that, I believe 97, 97 or 98 at the late, I think 97, that's right. He launched Fox News, right, in the US. And over time, it became, and is currently, last I checked, the dominant cable outlet for information, news, infotainment, a little bit of everything. We'll put it that way. And so I think I think something like that's pretty topical in terms of a fantasy narrative point. Drawing back on our Baudrillard video of the week, Savannah writes, the beginning of the video discussed simulacra, key term. Can you explain this term more in depth, and how can it relate or help us in the coming weeks? And I'll give us a simplification, right? Because that's what we're here for, right? Simplicity. Simulacrum might best be described as a copy of a copy with no original, or with a lost origin of sorts. And with mass media, we each enter a kind of prism or prismic system, okay, in which we recognize many signs and symbols, but without a full or even necessary understanding of their origin or their original intent. All right, and this could be why. So now I'm offering a through line. This could be why fake news is so enticing, because we can see that it is, and that's because we're already deep down a proverbial rabbit hole with no clear orientation about what reality is or what that means. And so simulacrum is a fascinating theorization about copy culture and how ideas that we institutionalize today, we may celebrate, protect, or outlaw, or whatever, and yet the current society will have a large disconnect from its original intent, from its origin, its meaning. And so that's a call to arms. That's a call to our ability to become better researchers, to understand history, to appreciate context, right? Whether it's political context or social context or cultural context, it's valuable. Let me grab a quick question from Gracie. We're winding down the Q&A for today. What are alienation effects? Looking at chapter 2 of Examining Popular Culture from Denisi, what are alienation effects and how do they correlate with social media? And some of the phrasing here stumps me a bit, but I think it's a valuable time to unpack another key term that's used, and this book does such a great job of introducing us to a number of terms that are very valuable in the community, the discipline known as cultural studies, right? And so we're getting that healthy cross-pollination there through this book. Alienation is a significant term. It's a significant term in Marxist theory, right? So it's a Marxian term that relates to how mass industrialization, in which is a form of and also produces advanced technology, by its progressive nature, alienates humanity by isolating us, if not ultimately rendering us useless over time. All right. So traditionally, this critique, right, this idea of alienation has a lot to do with anxiety produced by mechanized labor forces, right? This idea that our advanced technologies outpace us and they render us useless, right? Hence you fire all the staff, right? And because robots can do all the labor now. And maybe if the robots are controlled by fewer workers, then you're paying fewer. But now we have other issues, right, that we're facing. And that's one take. That's one directional use of alienation, and of which there are many forms, and arguably a more cultural studies bend to that would be if, let's take something like the absence of minority figures in television, right? Or maybe film history, but think about television as an area that has changed in recent years, but has a problematic history. And that's that the complete absence of representation in a form of mass media that heavily influences society and frames the way we think of ourselves alienates those who are essentially silenced via their lack of representation. So that's another way that we could think about alienation as a valuable key term. Okay, let me do one final question from Gabrielle, and then we will close out today's session in our exchanges here. Popular culture question. The book is on fire for you all in week 2. Lots of questions coming from there. Gabby writes, quote, "There are so many streaming platforms for movies and television shows, we can even say that they are in competition with one another. What are some ways you have seen these streaming platforms one-up their opponents?" All right, good question. This brings to mind a recent key term in media studies, and that is the clear identification of what we call streaming wars, right? This idea that these companies, these corporations are in competition with one another. It's business competition, it's economic competition, but it's a cultural. It's a competition for eyeballs, for users, for subscriptions. And absolutely, there are many methods and mechanisms that go on. The streaming wars are a real phenomenon, and it actually is escalating, if not accelerating, yearly. All right. This year alone, we saw 3 distinct streamers launch yet again, and we even saw one go by the wayside. Quibi, am I saying that one right? That came and went in 2020. Meanwhile, we have Peacock Network, essentially NBC Universal's streamer, launching. Formerly, previously we had CBS All Access, right? So the broadcast networks are kind of creating their streaming versions. You had last year the launch of Disney Plus, which is because of the interlocking ownership between multiple large media corporations. Disney Plus is also is tethered to Hulu, is also tethered to ESPN Plus. So each of these streamings, so they bundle them sometimes, and then the price hikes. I don't know if you all have seen this, but last few times you log into Netflix this month, they are announcing a price hike. Disney Plus just announced they're going to do a price hike next year in 2021 already, even though they just announced they reached an unprecedented 86 million subscribers in their first year. This is monopoly money, people. It really is unprecedented. Now we get it. The Disney brand is rock solid. Like, it's concrete. It's at the hyper real, right? It's the epicenter of the hyper real. But that it went that high that quick is astounding and astonishing. And it really didn't produce a lot of original content in this first year, and still managed such a climb. So it's just massive. And so they're absolutely, these networks are in competition with one another. They're kind of, the streaming giants are replacing what we used to look at in, let's say, like television studies as competition between the networks, or competition between broadcast networks versus cable or versus satellite or whatever. No. It's all going in different ways, right? You have HBO Max trying to get their foot in the door with all these big announcements, but then they're alienating people too, if I can call back that key term we just discussed. They're alienating their own Hollywood artists, right? We saw HBO Max announce that the entire Warner Brothers slate, because Warner Brothers is owned by Time Warner, which owns HBO, and thus this HBO Max streamer. The ownership group is essentially made the call: we're going to simultaneously release our entire slate of 2021 films, which a lot of which are carryovers from 2020 that never came out. We're going to release them all same day in theaters, but also for free if you have the HBO Max subscription. So that's an enormous, unprecedented move on their part. They're getting shredded in the entertainment trade presses for that. A lot of big names are speaking out against it, because a lot of people are losing back in money, because some are calling it an impulse to react to the pandemic, and create a solution when we're on the verge of a kind of mass distribution of vaccines and a potential stabilization probably by that third quarter, fourth quarter of 2021. So, but in the meantime, companies are hemorrhaging millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars lost, and we're really going to see this sort of entertainment industry shifting in big ways, and we already have seen it, and that's why streaming services are giants. They're not just competitors; they are monoliths now, because they're controlling billions of dollars and becoming a destination, sometimes the destination for content creators. Content creation, something we're interested in, invested in developing with our students in the major, the Communication, Media, and Ethics major, MacU. And so that's a great stopping point for us. Appreciate you all listening to our week 2 digital lecture series, our asynchronous dialogue, a response to your questions. And wow, am I looking forward to tackling more in the days and weeks to come. Thank you for listening.